And so it is the 11th day of June 2015, the Ochelli Effect, live here on UCY.TV radio. Thank you for tuning in, deciding to utilize your applicable application on your fondle slab of choice, or if you decided to go to the website, which is at ucy.tv/TOE, and check out all the wonderful stuff that is done there by the network, which includes the YouTube playlist, the archives by MP3, the donate button, and you can find your way to the chat or whatever else it is you wish to check out, especially a lot of other interesting shows, new stuff that is being added to the UCY.TV lineup all the time. Yup. So, thank you for doing that. Do appreciate it, and do appreciate you giving me this little bit of time on a Thursday night. Now, I did have a couple of things in mind to do today, and of course, they fell apart on me. So, here we go with Random Access Radio. Frank Gregory Ford is going to call in a few minutes, and we'll get the conversation started with him. And listen, if nobody else wants to join in on it, then that's where it'll stay. And that's what I'll do. But if you want to join in on the conversation, the number to just jump right on in is 718-717-8296. That number again, 718-717-8296. That is the call-in number if you are on the Charles.Ochelli Ochelli Skype list. You can also join right on into the conversation. I'll add you in. And this is totally open mind day on this one. We'll go in any direction you want to go in. So how about that? That's what we'll do today. Anyway, I hope everybody has been doing well who decides to listen to this particular presentation. And in fact, I hope everybody is actually doing well, because I'm tired of only rooting for my own team. In fact, in general, I'm pretty tired anyway. It becomes exhausting when you are continuously confronted with those that are extremely angry about their particular point of view not necessarily being validated by every single other person they encounter in the alternative stream. It does get a bit exhausting, especially if you have actually taken the time to do some work, and there are people that are speaking based on one YouTube video they saw, based on one article they had, some preconceived notion about a prejudice toward a particular group of people or particular groups of people, etc., and they fold it all right on into the master conspiracy theory that involves world domination on a continuous basis by the corporate and political elites that seem to occupy the positions of power all over the planet. It is rather fascinating to watch people that are generally not players, that don't normally stick their necks out, but do want to invest a large amount of their time, which is a resource that I think very few people really have a great understanding of at some points. You know, they do and want to invest a great deal of their time into telling you their opinions. So they spend a lot of time typing and responding and acting in all of these wonderful online forums in one form or another in order to incite different ideas to sort of resonate, regardless of exactly how ignorant or ill-founded those particular ideas are. They sit there and they invest their faith into the individuals who seem to be speaking from positions of knowledgeable authority, right? And it doesn't matter, you know, if you embrace an appeal to authority, regardless of whether it is in the very large sort of super FEMA camp of the mind out there that people generally occupy among the majority of the population, or if you've decided to go into the more niche-oriented world of alternative media, alternative philosophy, things that seem to be outside of the box, but really you have just gotten yourself into a smaller box. When you do that, and you still invest your faith in individuals without looking for yourselves, without thinking for yourselves, without actually actively searching for the evidence, for the resounding trail, the continuous trail of occurrences, individuals, events, and everything else that do actually fit together when you're sitting there and trying to force the puzzle pieces of the giant jigsaw together in order to create a picture that you already had in your own mind. This is where you make yourself no better off than the sleepwalking, wandering zombies out there that think that Fox News or think that MSNBC or think that Alex Jones or think that their local ABC affiliate or think that et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, think that all of these types of organizations must have the truth, and therefore they simply choose a new team. This is the thing. You don't choose a new team. You don't look to be part of a team. First try being yourselves. First try intelligently and critically examining situations. This would be a good idea. I don't know, in my mind, maybe I'm just crazy and ranting without any sort of, well, purpose, right? And as I've been called lately, just a blowhard who seems to speak about his own opinions without ever actually examining situations and all of that. Maybe that's exactly what I am, right? Somebody who doesn't think, who doesn't invest the time, who doesn't track down people to talk to them, who doesn't seek out witnesses, who doesn't look at the actual realities surrounding situations that people claim to understand and to translate out to the rest of the world because they want to feel special, that they have a particular special level of knowledge. I'm not so ego-driven that I believe that I'm all that damn special. I just do this because I have a compulsion to do it. But anyway, I think that addresses all of the sort of angry and rather vitriolic styled communications that I've been receiving lately. I think that fits the bill and answers all of you over the past week who have decided to contact me to point out that I don't actually pick on particular groups of individuals you think are so worthy of it, who thinks that for some reason I don't actually attack the true enemies, who thinks that for some reason I don't actually go after all of the corruption that I can possibly begin to comprehend for myself. I guess that's the way it is, right? Those of you who think that I'm just some sort of liar and blowhard and all that, that's lovely. That's lovely, really. I'm only attempting to decode what has been placed before me, and I'm doing the best I can. And if you don't understand that, there's lots of other choices out there. Tune in somewhere else. Okay. All of that having been said, I do have Dr. Ford with me, I think. How are you
Yes,
tonight?
you do, Chuck. Yeah. Hey, it's Friday, TGIF.
Well, actually, it's Thursday.
Oh, well, it's Friday for me. Friday for me. I'm headed to Alaska.
Oh,
So,
that's right. You
yeah,
are going to Alaska tomorrow, aren't you?
right. So I thought I'd weigh in with your listeners. So, so I'm ready to go, and I've been getting some input back from some of my folks that are headed off to Iraq. So, I just caught the tail end of what you were saying to your listeners, and I just have to say, and I am more impressed every day. Is this a hell of a country or what? All right. 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, 2000, what was it, 2001, 9/11, 2001, we had an epic attack, and that wasn't the first attack we've had on U.S. soil. That was the second attack by the same group of people, and the first time the World Trade Center was attacked, that hardly caused a ripple, and fortunately, I was on the show last night with Sally Castillo, and of course you hosted, and the amazing thing about all of this is that I've had affirmation. I had affirmation last night on your show, and everything I've had for the last, 30 years of intelligence, doing intelligence operations. I had affirmation last night, almost on all of it. And one thing I have to say is that before 9/11 hit, I was out there, chasing terrorists, studying terrorism, analyzing terrorism, and tracking terrorist sites, training sites in Libya, tracking terrorist sites in Syria, Iraq. All right, and one thing I can say is I never came across any experts, and now all of a sudden there's experts out there. Okay, pinstripe suits, the whole bit. Okay, and where were these experts when all of this stuff started to happen? Well, and where were they before we got the endless wars that we're getting now? Okay, obviously something's going on because everybody I know is packing their bags to go back to Iraq. So if this isn't a great country or what, when you can have an endless war start up 10, 12 years ago with a mystical enemy called Al Qaeda, led by a mystical person who's been dead for almost as long a period of time as that, and here we are. We just got extracted from that mess, and here we are going right back into it again. All right, is this great or what? I mean, do we have great leaders that can get us from one mess to another? And nobody questions it except for you, Chuck. You're the only one out there questioning it, as far as I can tell. This is truly amazing. So,
Well, in fairness, there's a lot of people that do question it. It's just they're not part of the majority. They're definitely part of, in that minority class of individuals that try to think critically. And just for the listeners' benefit here, this is Dr. Frank Gregory Ford, who, in case you missed my earlier shows with him, is the only the only counterintelligence person, the only military person I have ever heard of that has been renditioned, U.S. military, by the way, renditioned by his own people and survived. Okay, what was he renditioned for? Well, it's kind of a combination of things. Realistically, though, the fact that he was attempting to blow the whistle on Abu Ghraib long before 60 Minutes ran its piece, okay, actually while he was on the ground there and being the medical person patching up individuals who were surviving torture and also witnessing individuals who did not survive the process. Okay, torture, the enhanced interrogations, all those wonderful euphemisms. Let's put them aside. They were surviving torture. That was one thing. The other thing was, of course, he was also firsthand witness to the discovery of, and in fact, participant in the discovery of, weapons of mass destruction. Remember those weapons that we couldn't find because of a failure of intelligence in Iraq? Well, guess what? The truth is they were actually found. We actually know what their pedigree is, so we know exactly where they came from, how, from whence they were born, etc., etc. Frank Gregory Ford, trying to report these things, trying to actually follow the chain of command and do the right thing on the ground, was met with, well, first of all, we're going to ask you to retract your statements, and then we're going to strap you to a stretcher, shoot you full of drugs, abduct you, and I'm willing to bet, had you not made a couple of rather intelligent moves to preempt it, you would have been probably cast out of the back of a plane and been lost in the ocean somewhere, floating around with the alleged corpse of bin Laden by now. Okay? And all of this stuff, once again, when you understand it, are incursions into a foreign country, the invasions and occupations of sovereign nations all over the world. These things are all being done under the guise of certain principles that are absolutely fictitious. That is what the bottom line is. The war on terror is a big, huge psyop against the American people and thusly against the rest of the world in order to justify the ramping up and the continuous use and the feeding of the great monster that we now know as the military-industrial complex. Now, I think that's a fair assessment, but I did leave a few things out. Dr. Ford also has a long history in not just counterintelligence matters involved in Iraq. He also did encounter the guy that we are told is the alleged head of ISIS during his time there. Actually was an asset of his, somebody that you were in the same room with and stared eye to eye with. Okay, and they still are leaking that truth out little by little. And we were ahead of the curve on this show regarding the fact that this guy had been in our prison systems and all this other stuff way before there was this concept of ISIS, disseminated to the world. There's that. There's also the fact that you actually have a much longer history in military intelligence, counterintelligence, etc., that goes much further back, and we definitely touched upon that last night on another network when I had you and Celly Castillo on at the same time, who in his own right is a whistleblower, DEA relating directly to Iran-Contra, stuff like this, having firsthand knowledge about drug running and all these other wonderful things. And gee, doesn't this sound like the apple pie America that we were all led to believe our troops, our policing agencies, our government organizations, our alphabet soup of controllers out there were supposed to be in pursuit of? But then again, I digress, and all I am is a crazy conspiracy theorist who just seems to be drawing these correlations and coming up with these stories, whole cloth out of thin air. It has nothing to do with reality, Dr. Ford, does it?
That was a great show last night, Chuck. I wish your listeners that are listening now could have heard that show, okay, on American Freedom Radio. Boy, I love getting affirmation. I'm like anybody else. I'd like to think I'm doing the right thing. But to actually hear someone else say, yes, you did the right thing, you are correct, here's what happened from my perspective, in the same countries, the same places, with the same people, that couldn't have been any better. Okay, that show last night could not have been any better. And Mr. Castillo is right now he's already written a couple of books, and now he's putting together an explosive article with The Guardian, so your listeners can go. And who doesn't respect The Guardian? Okay, who challenges the validity of The Guardian? Okay, I mean, they brought us Ed Snowden. I mean, very few things that The Guardian hasn't been the vanguard of and out in front of, okay, in terms of politics, okay, world politics. And so anyway, by the way, I think the last time I spoke on your show, there were some people calling in questioning the Jessica Lynch issue, if I remember correctly, and what Jessica Lynch had to do with the head of ISIS. Okay, all right, I'll correct that for your listeners and elaborate. All right.
Well, let me first characterize what happened there, because we just mentioned this, and you have mentioned it on my show more than once. That your interaction with, and I always screw up his name, but Abu al-Baghdadi there. Okay, this guy who is the alleged head of ISIS at this point. Okay, and I say alleged all the time because really I don't know what the truth is regarding a lot of this stuff, because it's always so distorted when it comes to the mainstream approach, and really alternative media has done the very same thing. It's a very distorted, very difficult to sort out story. But all of that aside, you brought up the fact that this was the individual that you questioned regarding the disappearance of this female soldier, who turns out to be Jessica Lynch, who the military was rather concerned about when she had gone missing, and all of that. And here's the thing. There are people out there that believe that the Jessica Lynch event did not even happen. They think that it is about as likely that that happened as we killed bin Laden only in 2012. They think that that is exactly as fictitious as that. And they believe that, and I'm not saying I believe this, you understand, Dr. Ford, I don't. But the fact is that there are people that believe that that was merely another charade being perpetrated in the media in order to get sentiment, public sentiment, to support the war effort some more, to paint the people of Iraq as even more less than human than they had already been painted, in order to, whip up that ugly sentiment, and to make sure that people stayed on board with the agenda, which had to do with perpetuating the war, perpetuating the hostilities there, making sure that the business of warfare could continue quite unabated and without complaint from the public. So a lot of them think, and this was the feedback that I received, and actually callers didn't even hit upon this. This was all text messages and Facebook messages and Skype messages and all this other stuff. I would love for one of those people right now to call in. 718-717-8296. If you actually think that the Jessica Lynch thing did not happen, jump on in, explain to me why. Okay? No problem. I'll let you speak. But you're going to get answered. And the reason is, Dr. Ford was there. Okay? How much more plainly can I put that, Dr. Ford? And I'm sorry to have interrupted you, but I wanted to make sure the listener understood that.
Well, I have no problem, but one thing I have come to realize over 30 years of doing intelligence operations, 30 years, 3 decades, longer than most people that listen to your show have been alive. All right, so one thing I've come to the very, very brutal realization of is the fact that if the government puts something out in the media, and especially to the products of the George Bush Leave No Child Behind program, 60 to 70% of the population of America believes it. They absolutely, with all their heart, believe anything they hear in the media.
Without question.
And there's no questioning it. There's no questioning that premise right there. 60 to 70% will not challenge anything the government says. Very, very dangerous premise to live your life on. All right? And I'll say that to the population of America. Very dangerous thing to take your government at face value and not question every single statement your government makes. All right? And the Jessica Lynch issue, by the way, was about a 10-minute episode for me. All right? 10 minutes. I was in the middle of a war zone, and 2 Shia policemen brought he was the purported head of the Mukhabarat, the Saddam Hussein's intelligence apparatus in Samarra. Okay, that's the Mukhabarat, feared, highly effective intelligence apparatus. And he was brought to me by these 2 Shia policemen. And by the way, his name was Al-Agassi al-Baghdadi. All right, I didn't stutter. His name is Al-Agassi al-Baghdadi. a.k.a. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. All right.
Right.
They brought this young man to me, and and uh, I asked him through a translator. I said, "So, I have word that you know where our missing soldier is." And he looked at me and sneered. All right, he sneered very clearly, and he said something about, yes, he knew where she was because he was the head of Mukhabarat, and if anybody would know where a missing U.S. soldier was in Iraq, it would be the head of the Mukhabarat intelligence network. All right, that's why I suspected that, yes, whatever he said was true. And
And
the second thing,
at this time, I want you to sort of elaborate just a little more about what the Mukhabarat actually was slash is, and how it relates to the fact that this was really the truth about how Hussein maintained power as long as he did. It wasn't this elite Republican Guard that we kept hearing about, this military force, but really, as always, it's the intelligence apparatus that in which a great deal of power is residing when it comes to these types of regimes, and the Mukhabarat is no exception. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more on that, just to make sure that people understand what that actually means, that he was not only in it, but a prominent figure of it.
the Mukhabarat was what kept Saddam Hussein in power for 35 years. All right, the Mukhabarat was actually structured and built by the Soviet intelligence network. All right, the Soviets, the Russians, were in advising right up to the day we got there. Okay, till the day we invaded Iraq, the Soviets, the Russians, were there advising the Iraqis. All right, and the Soviets actually, with the KGB and what is called the GRU, the Military Intelligence Unit, built the Mukhabarat intelligence apparatus to keep internal dissent destroyed, hunt down the internal dissent in Iraq, and establish absolute control for Saddam Hussein. Their sole function was to sniff out any resistance, any insurrection, any insurgency, all right, in Iraq, and deal with it. And it wasn't a kinder, gentler way of dealing with any malcontents. No, they sent their people to Abu Ghraib prison that were suspects in any kind of collusion or conspiracy. Sent them to Abu Ghraib prison where they met a terrible death. All right, you were sent to Abu Ghraib prison by the Mukhabarat. You could expect to be tortured to death and buried in the main courtyard, along with the 35 to 50,000 other bodies, okay, that are still buried in the courtyard at Abu Ghraib.
Right.
Okay. And so the Mukhabarat was headquartered in the ancient city of Samarra. And me being an intelligence operative, a counterintelligence operative at that, I knew that what I needed to actually make a intelligent, how can I put it? Okay, to actually perform an intelligence coup is what I was after. All right, I needed to gain control of and gain access to the database that the Mukhabarat had built for 35 years. And here in front of me was the head of Mukhabarat, Samarra. He had been brought to me, okay, by the Shia policeman. That's why it was imperative that I, first of all, identified who the head of Mukhabarat was. Secondly, that here he was arriving right in front of me. I couldn't believe my luck. And third, that he knew something about our missing soldier. Now, when you invade a country, okay, these things happen. Mm-hmm. And I only had about 10 minutes to try to figure out the legitimacy and credibility of Mr. al-Baghdadi. And so I said, look, do you know anything about her? He said, yes, I do, and we're showing her a very good time. that's all I had to go on, and I ordered the Shia policeman to tell him that anything that happened to her was going to happen to him. So, and judging by the way the blood drained out of his face, yes, that was a credible threat to make to him. And what he said next was her location, and he couldn't say it fast enough because he didn't want anything to happen to himself. So there was a bit of self-interest in there, self-preservation involved in his giving us information. I had another 10 minutes to type the report and send the report out to my higher command about where her suspected location was, and that was that. That was the end of my exposure for Jessica Lynch. I hope I contributed to her being located and rescued. Okay, from I believe it was a hospital that she was found in and located in.
This was a priority, though. This was a priority among yourself and the other Army intelligence operatives that were there at the time, because they really badly wanted to retrieve her one way or another, because this has become public knowledge that she had been captured or disappeared off the battlefield, right? I mean, this was something that they sort of made a priority for you guys, along with all of the rest of what it was you were doing there. But this was one of those priorities, so it was absolutely perfectly logical for you to seek out any information that you could add to the intelligence pool to find a solution, right? I mean, I'm wondering if you could speak to that a little bit. I mean, they had probably impressed that upon you that this was a priority, right?
Well, I was in Kuwait with my unit, and we were moving north when we received word that Jessica Lynch, not Jessica Lynch, but her unit had been somehow misdirected. And now it has come out that a U.S. Marine Corps group of imbeciles intentionally misdirected that column. Okay, that column that was traveling north. Instead of turning left, the Marines told them to turn right, and I believe they took this column right into the middle of, I believe it was Ramadi, and the rest is pretty much history there. I mean, most of them were wiped out. Most of our soldiers were wiped out, and it wasn't. We weren't aware that anybody had even survived till a little bit later, and then we got the word that yes, a couple of soldiers, actually there was Jessica Lynch and another female soldier, I believe, if I remember correctly, were alive somewhere, and it was suspected and expected that they were in Iraqi hands. All right, and the issue being is that yes, this female soldier was in the hands of some very angry Iraqis. Okay, in a country that we had just invaded. So, imagination aside, what they were going to do to her. All right, and that added great anxiety to locating her and rescuing her. All right, so the imperative was on. But me myself, I wouldn't have put any greater value on her as any other soldier that needed to be rescued. But I only had about a window of about 10 minutes to ascertain, and I never laid a hand on Mr. Baghdadi. I didn't need to, and which is a good example of this enhanced interrogation being ridiculous. That in the real world and real intelligence operations, you don't need to beat the hell out of somebody, torture somebody, set them on fire, waterboard them, garrote them. You just need to talk to them. They know what the score is when they fall into your hands. And Mr. Baghdadi, as tough as he is, and lethal and dangerous as he is and was, all right, he knew what would happen to him if he didn't come clean and tell us where this missing soldier was. So that's why I believe that there was credibility and validity in what he said. And like I said, 10 minutes later, there was a report headed to my command, and within 3 days, the way I understand it, a Delta force was dispatched to rescue her. So.
Right, and this is not some sort of made-up story. There are many made-up stories out there, but this is an actual thing that did occur, And that's how you see it because you were on the ground and participating in it in some way. Not necessarily in the know regarding every single detail, but you had collected a piece of intelligence which would be useful toward it. And this is the way these things actually happen.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Fighting a war is nothing like Hollywood. Everybody assumes that they go see a movie, that has a few male model actors, and it has some dramatic episodes in it and scenes. They assume that that's the way war is. Well, first of all, war is highly overrated, and secondly, it is nothing unless you've been there. You can't comprehend the atmosphere. So, with that in mind, it was my imperative. I had other issues, that I had to deal with. Like, we were in the middle of a very angry city, and we were in a police station that was completely surrounded by enemy, and I had to deal with the fact that I was going to try to keep my people alive, and we were going to try to prosecute that war as we saw fit. All right, so those are the priorities. Right. Force protection was our priority as an intelligence operative team, and to try to locate these infamous weapons of mass destruction that were running around Iraq somewhere loose, as far as we could tell. Now, at that point, when I was in Samara, I had actually, that was at the tail end of my discovery of which I told your listeners many times now, the U.S. manufactured VX canisters of VX gas. All right, those canisters were uncovered, by one of my assets. I told your listeners what exactly happened and transpired with the Carlisle group. Okay, Carlisle group, the group that was actually ordered, and who ordered the manufacture of those weapons by George H.W. Bush. Mm-hmm. All right, George H.W. Bush. We located those weapons a few days before the move to Samara, where I met Mr. al-Baghdadi. All right, so we knew the weapons were there, yes, and the weapons were in the process at that point of being destroyed by British intelligence. British technical intelligence had come in and, at our request, destroyed those weapons. All right, because the scandal factor, the issue of those weapons even existing in Iraq was overwhelming. We had just invaded a sovereign nation that said, look, why are you invading us? We've got the receipts to show that you sent us these weapons of mass destruction, and now you're invading us to get them back. And here's your receipts. Come and take them. All right, that's what the atmosphere was in Iraq. So yes, those weapons were discovered, those weapons were established, and every single item that I just told your listeners and have mentioned on your show many times is in the court records right now, in the court records of the Ninth Circuit Court. All right, absolutely every single detail concerning those weapons. Now, the biggest thing that I have found out in the last 72 hours, okay, and which has floored me, is all this stuff about nuclear weapons, atomic bombs, and so forth in Iran. Okay, how we don't want the Iranians to have those weapons. Well, the way I understand it is the Iranians have had those weapons for a long time. They actually purchased, the Shah of Iran purchased several nuclear weapons when he was in power, and they have those weapons. That is what I have been told in the last 72 hours. In other words, all this hoopla about Israel not wanting Iran to have weapons, okay, is exactly that. A bunch of contrived, phony baloney nonsense, all right? And all this negotiation about keeping Iran from having and gaining nuclear weapons by our government, and the big agreement that we've made It's all more nonsense. All right, Iran has the nuclear weapons. They had the nuclear weapons a long time ago, and as I purported on your show, I already said, look, the detonators that were specifically designed by the Savannah River Group, okay, and the Los Alamos in the United States were uncovered in Iraq, okay, at the Al Qaeda facility.
Right.
So the nuclear detonators in Iraq were already there in place when we got there, and in Iran, the Shah of Iran had more than enough money to buy any type of nuclear weapon he wanted to. So in other words, weapons of mass destruction, nuclear and chemical, have been brought to the Iran-Iraq theater by the United States, okay, over the years. It's nothing new. They're already there. They have been there, all right? So that has been brought to my attention in the last 72 hours, in addition to the 10,000 troops that nobody is speaking about, U.S. troops that nobody is talking about in Syria that are specialty troops. Okay, they're specialists. They specialize in NBC, nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. They have been in Syria looking for the rest of the weapons that I made in my reports, the discovery that I made in my reports. Surprise, they are finding, as we speak, they are finding more weapons production facilities in Syria. So as a result, we've been saying, oh yes, we're sending people back to Iraq. Oh no, that's not the issue. They're already headed back to Iraq, and they've already been in Syria for the last several months, and they haven't told the American people what a disaster this whole situation has been. So that's what I've been, and I'm retired from this business. That's what's so amazing is I'm retired, but I still have people calling me and telling me, "Did you know this? Did you know about Bin Laden not being killed at Abbottabad, but he'd been dead for years?" Okay, I have people telling me this.
Right.
Well, who was killed in Abbottabad? Okay, yeah, I have the name. I gave the name to your listeners. Was it Akbar Khan? Okay, Akbar Khan was the man killed in the place of Bin Laden. This is just coming out now, but I'm hearing it. I'm just a humble retired doctor. I'm hearing it. So obviously, what has worked before for the American government is not working now. All right, people are just beginning to be aware that our government has been misleading them intentionally, and that is to be expected from most governments. Most governments are corrupt and nasty right down to their core, but this government has involved us in 2 endless wars, and this is the worst. We've had thousands and thousands of troops killed and people murdered and slaughtered over this situation of making money. All right, that's all it amounts to, is making money. Okay, so that's what we have this Friday, and this is what I'm getting, and this is the input I'm getting from people that are deeply concerned. So people like Sully Castillo and myself, they're deeply concerned about, and the whistleblowers, by the way, all the whistleblowers that have gone to prison trying to tell the American people what is happening. All right, John Curacao, he's allowed to be on your show coming up very shortly, Chuck. And
working on that.
Yes, John Curacao said, look, he actually captured Khalid Sheikh Mohammed for the CIA. He said, look, we can't be doing this. We tortured this man. We tortured him, and that makes everything he says illegal to use in court, unacceptable to use in court. It introduces evidence. We can't use it. And so the agency was so grateful that he pointed it out that they convicted him of exposing classified information and threw him in prison. And they threw him in prison over that.
Right.
Okay? And surprise, Right now, we are negotiating very, very quietly with the supposed the architect of 9/11, the person who slaughtered, what, 3,000 American people, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, okay, slaughtered 3,000 American people, okay, and we are trying to figure out a way now to let him out quietly without anybody finding out, all right? That is in progress right now. The American government,
Well, see,
if you listen,
they've done that several times, though. I mean, even when it came to Russian assets that we believed were KGB plants, that we believed were double agents that were coming over and defecting and things like this. This has happened before. Former KGB guys who have been, in captivity for years, it winds up later that the U.S. government winds up paying them all sorts of, compensation for the fact that they were imprisoned, tortured, had their lives interrupted, were being held under suspicion, et cetera, when they came here to try and defect. This is the kind of thing that goes on all the time. And, this is where I don't have a great deal of faith in the effectiveness of our intelligence community sometimes. But occasionally they get things right, I guess. Thing is, though, I'm telling you that even as we speak, there's a couple of guys that are still alive that were originally held in light of the assassinations in the 60s, thinking that they were connected to those as Russian agents, so on and so forth. And if you don't believe me, look around. There's a few of them that are still alive now. One of them lives in the same state as me and is actually trying to keep himself. He's under an assumed name. A lot of these guys are under assumed names and everything else now. But I mean, that's a reality. That's, historical fact. This is what happens with these guys. And, in light of all of that, which you were directly involved in, and I mean, some of the things that we started to discuss last night that I think are also relative and also fascinating here when we try and get a snapshot of what your viewpoint is like, your history with this goes a little further back. You were talking about pursuit of drug traffickers or much earlier on in the Caribbean, which relates directly to the South and Central American drug trafficking rings that we now know were connected to things like Iran-Contra, but very much so we're also connected to all the death squads throughout South and Central America, which were created, propagated, propped up, supported, funded by American interests all throughout South and Central America. And this was not just in the 80s, but for a very long time. These individuals were involved in drug trafficking, still remain involved to this day, some of them even founding the most infamous and murderous of the drug cartels that are being discussed now. Okay, all of that stuff having happened, you were also involved in the pursuit of these alleged criminals. And I found that story you told about being dispatched to stop a large marijuana shipment really fascinating. I wonder if you would touch upon that before we take this forward into modern times, because I've got some interesting things to run by you in today's world. But I wonder if you wouldn't touch upon that a little bit about your experiences in the Caribbean.
Okay, sure. And I'll make it fast because nobody wants to hear how terrible it is sailing the Caribbean. Okay, there are rougher ways to make a living. But I was a young man at that time, and we had received orders. I'd received orders one day to hop on a helicopter to fly out and land on a Coast Guard cutter. Okay, it was a 210-foot Coast Guard cutter, and it was on its way out to the Caribbean. And the orders, the sealed orders that the ship had and the command had was something like this, is that you do not open those orders until you are past the breakwater. That way, anybody watching the ship would not know where the ship was going, okay? And then try to redirect the shipments, the drug shipments, to go elsewhere. So we did not break open our orders till we were long past the breakwater, and this was at Cape Canaveral. You remember where they launch all the all the moon shots, moon rockets, and so forth. So,
Right.
so out of Cape Canaveral. So anyway, we'd get out there. We got out there, and for weeks, we had all kinds of rumors flying, and so we would go to one area and try to locate the boat that supposedly there were drugs on. Sometimes we'd locate the boat, sometimes we wouldn't. But one thing I found was that 100% of the time, all our information was wrong. And then I got the impression, distinct impression, that we were being directed intentionally to these empty quadrants, kept away, from the main drug running corridors. Mm-hmm. And in those days, we were trying to cut a deal and keep a working relationship with somebody named Manuel Noriega. All right, the Panamanian strongman.
Yeah, about what year was this? Just for the listeners' benefit.
That was, let me see, if I remember correctly. It was 70. That was 75 through 77.
Okay.
And of course this was just right on the tip, right before bad old cocaine started showing up on the scene. And of course that's cocaine changed the entire face of drug running. Marijuana was almost kind of fun. They had the South Florida Blockade Runners Association donating millions of dollars to the Jerry Lewis kids during the telethons and so forth.
Right.
It was almost kind of a circus atmosphere, carnivalistic atmosphere. But as soon as cocaine showed up, things got violent immediately. So excuse me a moment.
No problem. The money exponentially increased in the game there because cocaine, just by virtue of its density regarding its profitability, it absolutely ramped up the game and changed things. And of course, I pointed this out several times that as soon as those intelligence connections were established and the DEA became corrupted and the CIA got itself involved in the business of this shipment, this is right when we see the residuals of it landing right on the streets of America. And of course, we had, changing from the time when we were very much consumed with a heroin epidemic during the Vietnam War and just after it, it transformed into a cocaine epidemic on the streets in America because, well, there was a great deal more accessibility, and somebody got the bright idea that it would be a much more efficient mechanism of profiteering. And, well, gee, that somebody turns out later to be the CIA, who winds up being involved in all sorts of other actions. And I urge anybody who's not familiar with the work of Gary Webb to take a great long look at his work and what happened to him as a result of it, because this is the guy who, in my estimation, really blew the lid off of the cocaine running scandal related to the intelligence agencies in this country ever after. This is the guy who did the groundbreaking work. Now, there were a few other people who made hints at this kind of thing but didn't continue to pursue it. I think they were discouraged a great deal because, after all, who wants to know that the funding of death squads is being done by gun and drug shipments that the U.S. government and all of their partners were actually involved in, profiting from? And in fact, if you read Sally Castillo's book, Powder Burns, you learn that in a lot of cases it was the individuals who privately built fortunes for themselves also that were involved in this. But it makes perfect sense when you take a look at the context of the illicit drug history on the streets of this country that, of course, it changed right about then because they had gotten it all organized and it was a whole lot more efficient to make money with cocaine than it was with marijuana or with human trafficking, which, had a whole bunch of problems with it and everything else. Not that they abandoned human and gun running and things like this, or the disbursement of explosives and all those wonderful things. If you take a look at it, though, you can see the little stutter step where the evolution from one money-making scheme to another happened, and the result was, of course, cocaine first, becoming a wave-like epidemic on the streets, then, of course, becoming the crack epidemic in the 80s, which I just spoke to about as best I could. And again, I just tip my hat and say, take a look at Gary Webb's work regarding this. But meanwhile, you were there at the time of transition, where we're looking at the difference between the sort of inefficient method of running stuff like marijuana, which again seems like a joke compared to the poison and the infrastructure that was built, the murders that needed to be committed, the body count attached to the cocaine business. And this is something that you got to see kind of change right in front of you because you were there during exactly that time, which is as the Vietnam War was winding down and all of these things were beginning to ramp up, right?
That's absolutely correct. Now, by the way, the NSA did not like what we had to say last night, and my system has been completely jammed, ever since. Now, Chuck, very, very shortly we will be able to go back online. My technician has said, Kathy, the wonderful Kathy, has said, okay, we can go back on Skype and get a much better auditory on this show. Okay, if so,
sure.
So we can do that if and when you're ready. All right, but it took some doing, but we're back on the air for your listeners, and they can probably hear me even better now that we removed this great big jamming Niji signal. Okay, that the NSA was sending to my computer. So.
Well, I didn't say this to you before we got on, but the fact is I couldn't even get my stuff open and moving earlier to try and do the post for this show. So we have a very limited advertisement that went out for the show because all of a sudden I'm jammed up with a bunch of things that shouldn't even be on the computer. So I had to restart and everything again.
Well, that should give your listeners, some validity as to what the subject matter that we're talking about here. Yes, this is sensitive issues. These are sensitive issues. When the sitting president of the United States, whose family is making a fortune off of weapons of mass destruction, can launch a war into a sovereign nation and actually have that war come about and then keep the United States in that war for 10 years, okay, the longest running ground war we've ever had. And then just about the time we're ready to extract ourselves, here we are in it again with a brand new bogeyman, okay, to go chase after for another 10 years, okay? That shows what kind of loss of control that we have had in this country. The Patriot Act, it was supposed to be dismantled and removed. Well, not as far as I can tell. What these politicians, they like things like this. President Obama has not removed one single presidential order, executive order, that Bush implemented at the breaking of 9/11. Okay, he has not removed anything. He's actually enhanced all the population and civilian population surveillance programs that were in place and now are in place. Even stronger on electronic surveillance. All right? People seem to forget who Ed Snowden is. Ed Snowden has tried to do exactly what we're trying to do, warn the American people that their government is out of control. It is a rogue government. Okay?
Absolutely. Listen, if your Skype thing is ready, you go ahead and try and dial into me with that. And what I'll do is I'll lay out a little bit of my feelings about the Bush crime syndicate in the meantime, and we'll see if you can join me and get a clearer connection, okay?
Yeah, we're still scanning. We're still scanning for the settings, but we should be there very, very shortly. So
okay,
yeah, so
no problem.
Keep me on the air, okay? If your listeners can still hear me and I'm still, legible, okay, and audible, I'll keep talking, all right, and we'll pull this up very shortly.
No,
So,
absolutely, and a point being made by message here. Yeah, George Washington might have issued executive orders, but this has definitely been ramped up ever since. Ever since 9/11, we have seen the high speed, reaction, the high speed injection of this kind of mechanism being put into place even further in recent times. And of course, this is the name of the game. And after all, look, if you want to go back to the inception of the country and say that, we were an evil thing from the beginning, that's fine and dandy. But before George Washington was born, before we had a president or anything else, well, ladies and gentlemen, like Maria Heller said on my show, when you talk about a nation which is born out of genocide, there's going to be some bad karma that comes along with it. Let's not forget that the indigenous people to this land that we currently occupy were absolutely devastated, murdered, slaughtered long before any of that happened. Okay? So that's the real truth of it. And gee, if we want to go back and pick on things all the way back to George Washington, we can do that. That's fine. Anyway.
yeah, but by the way, I just learned that the Republican Party was actually formed in California. I don't know if your listeners know that. I had no idea. It was actually formed in the area of Lake Tahoe. And John C. Fremont, considered one of the great mountain men and Western explorers, was responsible for starting the Republican Party as we know it today. But as you mentioned that, Chuck, I can say this with all assurity that John C. Fremont was one of the most dastardly war criminals, as his business that made him the money to go into politics was the enslavement of Native Americans and the formation of death squads to hunt down rogue Native Americans that were trying to just get away, trying to survive in the Lake Tahoe, Washoe area, of Reno. And he made his money by selling Native Americans into slavery to the Spanish. I just found this out. It's so amazing. And to this day, as a result, what we have as a result of that, of his monstrous behavior in California and Nevada, is the fact that we have the Republican Party carrying on to this day. So we can actually say the Republican Party can thank California, which they never like to do, and they can thank John C. Fremont for their formation, and existence.
Sorry about that. I had a little bit of an interruption there. Anyway, no, you're right. This all traces back. We can trace things backwards and backwards and backwards all we want, but the thing is, when we're talking about modern times, how far back do we want to go in the history to talk about the corrupt mechanisms by which the country is founded? We can do that all day.
Right. Okay. So Mr. Castillo actually was able to fill in all the gaps that I had in my Central American mission assignments, intelligence assignments, and it was rather dramatic, and I had great validation last night. And we were able to show where torture, as a tool of state policy, has its foundation in Latin America and is connected directly to the drug trade, the illicit drug trade, in Central America and South America, all right? And they were formed, both institutions were formed at the behest of the School of the Americas, in Panama at the time, and they have been synergistic and their function. Synergistic. They have fed each other. Okay. Importation of drugs, cocaine, into the U.S. and the foundation of torture. Yes. We, Chuck, we are now Skyping into your show, so hopefully we'll have a better auditory.
All right. Well, let's now see.
Okay.
There we go.
Hey, Jack.
Hi.
Turn it down. It's got feedback. Here.
There we go. Okay.
Hang on a second. I'm turn you down a bit.
No problem. We're fine. But
how's the feedback?
it's okay. I can still hear myself kicking back a little.
Okay, wait. Okay, so better?
Let's see now. I'm still hearing myself a bit.
Okay.
There we go. There we go. I'm still hearing it, but it's not that bad.
Is that better?
Let's see. Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Okay, excellent. So as we were tying these things together, of course, there's direct things that can be correlated from one to the other, like James Steele. Now, we can explain who James Steele is and explain how it is that he actually plays a part in both the illicit programs, the drug running programs of illicit drugs, I should say, and all of that in the context of the death squads, et cetera, in Central and South America. This guy is actually one of the people who sets them up, who actually trains them, who brings the method of torture to the people that are involved in these operations in Central and South America, who actually instructs them that this is the way to get things done, so on and so forth. Am I missing something here, Dr. Ford?
You're also missing the Israelis, the Mossad. That's one thing that was only mentioned briefly last night, but the Israelis have been an integral part in the training of the death squads, the Colombian death squads. Now, why Israel is involved in such a nefarious business, I don't know. But I can say that when I was in Panama, there were several Israeli teams operating in Panama City with me. All right, Mossad, of course, and they have had a long, extensive history of being involved with all the Colombian drug cartels and the training of those squads. All the atrocities that you hear about being committed by the Colombian cartels and in Mexico actually had the technical training and the weapons provision by the Israelis. All right. So,
well, hand in hand in partnership with the Americans. And Steele, again, interesting guy, right? He played an integral part in that. And then what happens to him later? Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, he is known, for your listeners, he is known as the butcher of Latin America. Now, you don't get a moniker like that unless you have a very bloodthirsty reputation. And his cohort, his executive officer, was somebody named Blowtorch Bob Suarez. Okay, now the two of them have blazed a path across Central America, for the last 25 years. Okay, and what is amazing now is that the international criminal courts have said, yes, these people have done very bad things. It's time that we brought them to justice. And I find what's interesting is who is standing up for Colonel Steele right now. Bob Suarez has been dead for years, by the way.
Right.
He died in agony, fortunately, of throat cancer, okay? But not after he had sent many, many innocent people to a ghastly death, a grisly death, all right, in his torture chambers.
Well, are you aware of how he got that name, Blowtorch Bob?
Well, it doesn't stretch the imagination much to figure that one out, but that's what he liked to do, was what he got his first bit of instruction at the School of the Americas, and then he used a blowtorch to interrogate any suspects. So any suspects involved in any kind of insurgencies in either El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras. Okay, it was blowtorch Bob. Every single time.
Right. So just to be clear, we're talking about the use of acetylene torch as an implement to extract information from those you're interrogating directly. So either threatening them with it, literally burning them, literally committing murder, with this being like his weapon of choice. This is how that moniker was laid upon him. Okay, I just wanted to make that extremely clear.
Yes.
That's why he's being called Blowtorch Bob. Of course, not necessarily always a blowtorch, but sometimes a focused acetylene kind of. There's all sorts of torches that were used, and this guy just liked to use fire on people. It seems that was his preference, and that's how he got that reputation. So that's where that comes from. By the way, sorry.
Well, he was the working associate of the butcher of Latin America, Colonel James Steele. Now, as I said, in times when there's atonement, okay, when these people are brought to justice, who do you think is standing up and saying what a bunch of great guys these were, okay, and are? Okay, Paul Wolfowitz, okay, everybody remembers Paul Wolfowitz, head of the IMF Bank. He was involved. He was as one of the funders of the neocon party, and plus there's that dual citizenship thing with Israel again. All right, another dual citizen, and also Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney has stepped forward and said, "Gee, what a great guy Colonel Steele is. What a wonderful guy, and thank God we had him." Okay, to implement Dick Cheney's program called Q-Bark. Okay, the infamous and notorious Q-Bark program, which got its start, has its roots in the infamous Phoenix program of Vietnam. All right, yes. So these people are standing up right now, as I mentioned last night, from my contact in Nicaragua. They said, watch out for these guys. These guys, have extensive political contacts in the now ongoing program called Copper Green. Mm-hmm. Copper Green, okay? It is gone global. This kinder, gentler system that George Bush introduced. Remember that term, kinder and gentler nation? Okay, well, this kinder, gentler system of torture, rendition, dismemberment, mayhem, murder, okay, for a fee, of course, for a fee, that's the capitalist way, that's the American way, okay, now has gone global, all right? That's what it happened when Colonel Steele was in Central America. And it worked out so well. His death squads and torture chambers worked out so well that he was asked to transport this grisly nightmare, okay, to my neck of the woods in Iraq. All right. He was asked to transport it and work with somebody named Jeffrey Miller, who headed up the interrogation program in Guantanamo. So Mr. Jeffrey Miller and this overachiever, Colonel Steele, launched the program in Abu Ghraib prison, okay, where, of course, I had to treat the victims of these programs, all right? I had to treat victims in Samara, the city of Samara, and out of Abu Ghraib. And as you might guess who was in Abu Ghraib? And this was confirmed with General Janis Karpinski not too long ago, right, that in the prison itself, in Building 1A, where all these atrocities were happening, the Israelis were there along with us.
Right.
Nobody seems to know where they came from or how they got there, but there's the Israelis. All right, so they were involved in these programs. You have drugs, you have torture, murder, mayhem, and the Israelis. All right, so
Well,
this program
sounds
has
like
been
just
ex-
another day to me because it seems as though every time I turn around and I start to dig into any of these intelligence operations that have to do with deceiving the public and committing atrocities against groups of people all over the planet, it seems to me as though there's always an Israeli contingent representing. I don't know why that is exactly, but it does seem to be a consistent thing that I discover. I don't know, maybe I'm
well,
crazy.
well, on your show about a month ago, uh, I came out with a revelation, and as I found out that Mr. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the founder of ISIS, okay, the new kid on the block that we have to go fight now, all right, Mr. Al-Baghdadi, okay, at the time when I recruited him to work for American intelligence. All right, I recruited him to work for American intelligence. I knew he was Mukhabarat. What I did not know up until about a month ago, and I spoke about this on your show for your listeners, was surprise of all things. The Israelis came out and said, yes, he was our Mossad agent. He was our trained Mossad agent. So that's great. So, in other words, I recruited somebody I thought was a Mukhabarat agent and turned him into a double agent when he went to work for us.
Mhm.
The whole time he's laughing up his sleeve because he's sending everything about American intelligence, Iraqi intelligence to the Israelis. All right, so the Israelis knew all about Jessica Lynch. Okay, they knew all about the inner workings of the counterintelligence operation inside Iraq. All right, and they also know about our weapons of mass destruction. All right, inside
Mhm.
Iraq, and they probably know about those detonators that I spoke about on your show. Those nuclear detonators that are running around loose, probably in the hands of ISIS now. All
Mhm.
right. So it's amazing how the Israelis keep showing up in all of this. The Israelis show up in Central America, they show up in Latin America, and then they show up at Abu Ghraib prison. All right. I don't quite understand it myself, since when I went to school, in intelligence school years ago, one of the first precautions that they taught us was that the Israelis are a hostile intelligence collection service. All right. Why are the Israelis involved in virtually every aspect of American politics? Every single aspect. All right. You can't find one representative, one congressman, one senator that doesn't have either a Mossad affiliate working for them. One. It's usually just one, or you can't find a a single political entity like APAC, okay, that isn't entirely made of Israelis influencing U.S. policy, and especially U.S. policy in the Middle East. Look at this debacle with Netanyahu,
Mhm.
okay, and what is happening now with Iran. All right, all of this stuff going on about Iran, that's all inspired by Israel. Okay, we send a ship over. This was the Liberty. We send a ship over, and what happens? The ship is inconvenient. Okay, so Israel sends a message to President Johnson and says, "Destroy that ship." And President Johnson says, "Good, good. Yes, we will destroy an American ship." I actually saw the video. Okay, the video shot inside the Oval Office with Johnson saying, "I want that goddamn ship on the bottom of the ocean, the USS Liberty." All right. Now, why Johnson hasn't had why the Johnson family hasn't had every single bit of property confiscated by the American government over that one episode, I don't know. But they should have it immediately. And secondly, why haven't the Israelis atoned for the destruction of the Liberty? All right, they almost sank it. They killed, 80 something sailors. All right, they sprayed it with napalm. They machine gunned sailors leaping off that ship that were on fire. All right, why haven't they atoned? I don't know. Okay, I don't know where they get this kind of clout. They go into Central America. They set up the drug trades, the drug operations. All right. I looked at the Bush administration that was running the Department of Defense, and I've never seen so many dual citizenships in my whole life. All right. Mm-hmm. I'd say probably 70% of those folks that were running the Department of Defense during the Iraq invasion had double passports, dual passports. All right, Israel and U.S. Nobody else is allowed in. You don't see dual citizenships with Russians, dual citizenships with Japanese, dual citizenships with the UK. No, you only see it with Israelis. How is that, and why did that happen? I don't know myself, but it bears looking at.
Right,
okay.
And what it is, I mean, there are dual citizens of all types of nations in this country, but the fact that they have coalesced into positions of power throughout the government and in a bunch of NGOs, this is bizarre. Because to me, I don't know, again, maybe it's just because I have a less sophisticated understanding of this than some people, but in my estimation, when you take an oath of office, when you basically swear allegiance to do the bidding of this nation, you would assume that if your allegiance is questionable to begin with because you've already sworn allegiance to a foreign power, this would disqualify you from holding said office, in my estimation, because you're supposed to be defending this nation. What's to say that that couldn't come into conflict with the fact that you've given allegiance to a foreign power, et cetera, et cetera? Why is it that this isn't being questioned on a more massive scale? I do not know. But I will say that it does seem after a while that so many coincidences lead you to understand that there is an agenda in play which is rather coherent. This is not something that occurred by happenstance. This is something that has been done strategically. And interesting, again, that it is, well, somebody pointed out on this show, a nation about the size of the state of New Jersey with about the population of the city of New York that wields power over the largest and strongest military on the planet, which is ours, which wields power in the civilian corridors of power, which for the strongest nation, the most prominent nation on the planet, which is us again. Why this is occurring, why it is we're being leveraged by them, has always been the big question, in my estimation. But I wonder because, believe it or not, we've gone through about an hour and 20 here. And we've spoken to a lot of historical events. We've gotten your recount of some things which are significant and notable occurrences in recent history. But I'm wondering, since you are retired now, and you are somebody who is looking at, not just taking your marching orders from the people at Fox News or USA Today or any of these other elements out there in the information stream. Curious, I want to hear actually what your viewpoint is on this, and I'm going to read from Blacklisted News really quickly. Okay, for most consumers of alternative news and media, the lineup of the players constitutes the tyrants and their systemic control and the enlightened underground, with both sides fighting the great battle of winning the hearts and minds of the rest of the public. Okay, for the alternative news and information community, the possibility of large-scale psychological operations within alternative media itself are generally outside the spectrum of the possible. Indeed, crowds today are still cheering on Assange and his vaudeville whistleblower roadshow with Bradley Chelsea Manning, and most recently finding themselves intellectually snowed in by our latest hero, Snowden. Okay, this basically speaks to, in that paragraph, and this is my commentary, about how people are not considering in the alternative media that they may actually be having a psychological operation conducted against them via the introduction of faulty information and less than reliable claims by various individuals. Whereas I respond to say that everyone should examine everything as closely as they can and do their best to sort through the information, disinformation, and misinformation out there. Back to the article. The Jade Helm 15. In 2015, the focal point has become Jade Helm 15 training operations across at least 7 states, with SOCOM running the training exercise for realistic military training. The brief document lists role-playing involving Texas and Utah as hostile areas, with insurgents in Southern California and other states like Colorado, California, and Nevada as friendly. On the surface, the exercise gives credence to the ultimate fears and paranoia of Tea Party and militia groups. Clearly, the U.S. government is prepping for everything from martial law to economic collapse and speculation. Okay. Fending off the mainstream media's dishonest portrayal of the patriot and alternative media's fears, Alex Newman of the New American concludes. Of course, critics of Jade Helm and the Obama administration should stick to facts that can be proven rather than speculations. Most have done that, including many of those being dishonestly smeared by the deceitful media. However, the establishment press has an even more serious responsibility and duty to do the same. Stick to the facts, do not deceive readers, question those in power, and adhere to basic journalistic ethics. Instead of sticking to the facts and being honest, though, establishment propaganda, masquerading as journalists, have once again shown the world why they cannot be trusted. As such, it is no surprise that so few Americans trust the mainstream, in quotes, press, and are flocking to the alternative media by the millions. Now, Jade Helm, in my estimation, has been overblown and overspeculated upon, and this is again Ochelli's commentary, has been overspeculated and overblown in a lot of cases. However, it is troublesome. I don't believe that we are facing the imminent lockdown of martial law throughout the country. I do believe that we are looking at an intelligence exercise that does have a purpose. That purpose, I don't think, has been self-evident as of yet, but we're working on it, and we're trying to sort this out. And of course, as the article stated, the mainstream media obviously can't be trusted. The alternative media is jumping to far too many conclusions, but the nature of intelligence training and operations and things like that are widely misunderstood. I point to the fact that in many localities that are relatively within the proximity of intelligence training facilities, you will see individuals that are introduced into civilian populations constantly. Again, still my commentary. And this is something that is part of standard operating procedure regarding this training. However, there is a difference with Jade Helm. Something is afoot, that is for sure. I just don't believe that we are looking at the imminent lockdown of every dissident into FEMA camps. I don't agree. Okay, that's what it is. I don't agree with that idea. But this is a fascinating development and is troublesome. Now, as a counterintelligence, well, I stopped myself from using an adjective there, but as someone who is well experienced in the world of counterintelligence, who understands exactly how these things are portrayed and how they are floated out there into the public consciousness and disseminated via various propaganda methods, what is your total take on what you understand about Jade Helm?
Okay, well, I'm basing my understanding of Jade Helm on 3 decades of being in the intelligence business and being in several countries that have either built up or suffered an insurrection, civil war, or were on their way down, into complete anarchy. And so there's always a pattern, okay? There's always a flow that is quantifiable. And as I've said now several times since I've been asked, numerous questions about Jade Helm, is what is it? Okay. Well, first of all, it's something in the intelligence business, especially human intelligence, called ISR. That's an acronym you won't see anywhere else except in the trades. Okay, we call them the blue-collar trades. And the ISR stands for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, all right? Mm-hmm. And the reason why it's been implemented is something called the NDAA, which is, Chuck, what does that acronym stand for?
The National Defense Authorization Act, which is the hand-in-hand partner to the Patriot Act and thusly the continuation of American surveillance programs on their own citizens and the restriction of speech through those surveillance programs is all evident in the NDAA, as well as various other mechanisms which have eroded the overall freedoms of the citizenry in this country. How about that?
Very good. Thank you. And I hope all your listeners heard that, because that's what they're seeing is the implementation of the NDAA. Now, the NDAA results from this is that anybody who's been alive and not in a coma for the last 8 to 10 years has realized that, yes, there's been millions of people losing their property. Okay, their homes have been repossessed and they've been losing their property. You don't hear about it much because the media has repressed. You have repressed this. Okay, there again, there's that evil media again. Controlled by Sam Vell and a few other slumlords at the behest of the Jewish lobby. Okay, AIPAC. But here's the situation: is that when the government, okay, and this is what has always protected Americans, is that there's always been a middle class, a large middle class that have property. That's what separates us from every other country in the world, and that's what makes our system work, is the middle class. The middle class has been under direct assault for about the last 15 years. Direct assault. Every institution you can imagine, okay, everything from civil service to industrial regulation has been under direct assault and has been dismantled, taken apart. Laws protecting people, EPA laws and so forth, have just about become as toothless as any law could be. But the problem is people are losing their property. And that has always provided the protection, the isolation blanket between a person, an individual person, and his government. All right? The government can come, and to keep people in line, they can take the property. Okay? That's what separates you from the U.S. government doing banana republic things, like throwing you into jail forever, okay, if they wish. So
without
what
any
I see
sort of
happening
due
with
process,
Jade Helm is
without any
is
sort of due
this.
process and in complete violation to your constitutional rights via the mechanisms that are provided by these bills, you are completely superseded as an entity with rights, and all of the teeth have been extracted from any protections, and all of the guts have ever after been eviscerated from said protections in the efforts to battle with the war on terror. Okay, that's what that comes down to. And now, of course, your view in that context on Jade Helm.
Absolutely that, Chuck. You couldn't have said it more succinctly and precisely. there's millions of people now that have lost their homes. That means there is nothing protecting those individuals from the government. Don't think the government is a benevolent entity. No, the government exists for the government. All right. And this government is realizing, hey, all of a sudden the protection layer, which has always been personal property, has been removed. What else do we have to control these millions and millions of angry people that were the backbone of the middle class? Well, surprise, as you can look at any other country in the world, okay, and see this in play, is your body. Your physical body becomes the next property of the government. All right? It's a scary thought, but everybody says, oh, no, that can't happen in the United States government. Oh, really? Okay, why do you think Jade Helm is happening? It's a cursory provision. All right, the government wants to see what will happen when you have uniformed, and that's the big thing, camouflaged, uniform American troops walking your streets. They want to see the reaction. Okay, they want to analyze the reaction. There's some massive database collection systems that are actually collecting now and watching to see the total end result of what happens when you have camouflaged, uniform, special forces. That's what SOCOM stands for, Special Forces Command personnel walking the streets. There are no more posse comitatus protections, in place now. That's what George W. Bush removed. First thing he removed was protections of the middle class. And now we have troops that are coming back saying, oh, sure, we don't have a problem firing on our own citizens. Oh, no problem. Sure, we will go in as the NDAA now authorizes to have uniformed soldiers to walk into anybody's house, anywhere publicly, physically grab you, lay their hands on your property, which is your body, and remove you to a site of their choosing, and keep you indeterminately till whatever event that they determine, is over. Okay, so in other words, if you're out protesting a war, like the up and coming war against ISIS, you're protesting. They can send a couple of special forces troops in preferably woodland camouflage, and grab you and your family, and in your house or any public place, a school or wherever, and put you into a concentration center, aka concentration camp. And if everybody thinks, oh, they don't exist, yes, they do exist. Specifically in the Southwest. Now, where do you think this whole exercise is being aimed at? The Southwest. Hopefully this transmission is reaching a few people that can think. Okay, that's always a big question mark in my mind. Mm-hmm. All right. Yes, they need to think. This is what is happening. Millions of people have lost their homes. They've lost their property. Guess what? The government has to implement now is a form of control. The next control that the government has to those people that have lost everything is their bodies. And how do you do that? You bring in a group of military people that used to be forbidden entirely, military people that will physically grab you and put you in custody and take you to a holding center, and forever. It can be in perpetuity. As long as the government wants to, they can do it. That's what I see as the biggest danger right now with NDAA. And these are always innocuous terms. Gee, on the face of them, you hear about them. Oh, that doesn't sound so bad. Okay, that's helping the government fight terrorism, right? Surprise, folks! Surprise! There never was a war on terrorism. you know, as I said at the beginning of this show, where were these experts when I was tracking these terrorist training camps in Libya, Syria, and Iraq? They didn't want to hear my reports. They didn't want to see my reports about financial tracking of these institutions. Okay, they didn't care. Now all of a sudden it became chic to be a counter-terrorist. Okay, with 9/11, all of a sudden these experts show up out of nowhere. Okay, pinstripe suits and tassel shoes, of course. But the thing is now is this terrorism business has allowed the government to, first of all, milk the entire system, dismantle all our protections, all our rights, and set the whole country up to where it is subservient and subjugated by the military-industrial complex. All right? If you don't think so, ask how many millionaires were made in Iraq alone, Iraq and Afghanistan. Try 1 million millionaires were made, all right, as a result of those two wars. All right, Senator Feinstein, who I reported the initial atrocities at Abu Ghraib prison, who launched the investigation of the agency based on my reports to her husband alone, okay, made $600 million a year when Iraq was in operation. All right, when OEF and OIF, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, were in play, her husband made $600 million a year. That was just Dianne Feinstein's husband. All right, so here we have Jade Helm now, okay, being put into play with all the naysayers saying, oh yeah, everybody that challenges or questions this operation is a conspiracy theorist. Hey, I've spent my whole life in conspiracy, okay, involved in one conspiracy or another, hunting conspiracies down, identifying them. And just because this is coming from the United States government doesn't mean it's not a conspiracy to dismantle what is left of America. All right? The American middle class, to be more exact. The middle class. It is the middle class was identified by the neocons that took over this country at the behest of 9/11, and the neocons have identified the middle class as the fat hog that needs to be carved up. All right, that needs to be carved up. Okay, that's what our government views the middle class as. Most of us are middle class, and guess what? I know I am. I'm middle class. Everybody I know is middle class. Okay, so there you have it, folks. You have something really campy named Jade Helm saying, oh yeah, it's okay to have U.S. troops walk into your house. This might sound like the Nazi regime or the Soviet regime because it's very, very close. They can walk into your house, physically grab you, and there ain't nothing you're going to be able to do about it. All right? Here it is. This is it. This is happening. That's what I see with Jade Helm. Oh, well, yes.
You know what?
Be afraid.
But I'm going to interject something here which is not going to be popular, and probably you're not going to like what I'm going to say either, but I want to throw it at you and let you respond to it, because I have a different take on this, okay? And it's going to sound really strange coming from me, but here it goes. I think that what we are looking at is yet again another false story being floated. I think that it is absolutely meant to get people like myself very bent out of shape and very much on a tear and very much on the side of those that think that this is an apocalyptic thing that is going to occur here with Jade Helm specifically. I think that it's been specifically unleashed out into the information stream as a test in and of itself. I think that even if these operations do go forward a bit, we're not going to see any massive clampdown on dissidents or individuals in this country, not at this time and not with this program. I think that this is an intelligence collection operation in and of itself. The sheer act of allowing it to sort of leak out into the alternative media stream and to allow it to be answered by the mainstream media, to me, is absolutely evidence that it is nothing more than a psychological operation to test exactly where people will wind up standing if a real operation is coming. I think that the time period that everybody is worried about is going to pass. I think that nobody is going to be put into these concentration camps and everything else right now. I think that this is not imminent and it's not going to happen, but what they are doing is testing the waters to see exactly how receptive and how quickly the public will acquiesce, and exactly how will those dissidents who are constantly speaking out and pointing out the real conspiracies that do happen. It is meant to sort of suck us in, to make us make a lot of statements that will wind up becoming false predictions. And I think that that's precisely what the point of it is on that level. But on another level, it has also been introduced as a way to test exactly what the general public's reaction would be to a more extreme implementation of things that do violate posse comitatus, that do violate every last one of your 10 Bill of Rights provisions. I think that this is an absolute test to see what happens when there is imminent danger of absolutely being no adherence to due process, to freedom of speech being completely eliminated. What happens when we push it up just a little bit further and we give them the idea that this may be coming? I think that it's a psyop in and of itself. I really do. And I'm sure that regardless of what your viewpoint is on it, you hope I'm right, because nobody wants to see this stuff go live. Not really. Nobody really wants to see that happen, no matter what your point of view is. Even the sleepwalkers out there don't want to see this come to pass. But I think that's what it is. I really do believe that it is a whole psychological operation that has been created just to test the tolerances in the population and the subpopulation, again, of those that are alternative thinkers and those that do question everything and those that do have an oppositional kind of position relating to putting faith or trust in the conduct of this government as it stands and all of its agencies. I think that this has been a massive test and will continue to be. But at the same time, is it a possibility that something like this could occur? It is. But I do believe that this is going to come and go, as have many sort of doomsday scenarios that have been batted back and forth in the alternative media, at least as long as I've been an observer, and among the underground collectors and sharers of information. I think that this is really to test the entirety of the population to see what would happen if they bluntly and publicly absolutely disregarded every single tenet of the rights of the American citizenry. Now, you may just think I'm being over optimistic or whatever, Dr. Ford, but go right ahead and respond to what I just said.
Sure. Remember what I said, ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. This has all the hallmarks of exactly that. Okay, and you can add provocation. Provocation is always used, when they put something out like advertising for Jade Helm. It's provocation, what that does, and you've got some very smart people watching this, okay? One of my jobs over the 30 years wasn't just human intelligence collection, running spies, okay, being a spy. It was intelligence analyst, all right? I had to prepare all the information coming in from many sources, multiple sources, and place them into a cogent, viable, digestible report, and then brief that report. So all the levels that I've briefed my intelligence reports to go from heads of state to generals, of multiple countries. many countries. All right, and then when after I made my presentation, you always have the little attack dogs, that are busy trying to get promoted, and they're busy trying to impress the general, the senator, the congressman, the president, whoever. Okay, they're trying to impress them, so they immediately attack what I have had to say. All right, and so in 30 years, I can say that I have never been wrong about any of my points made in my intelligence report. And that is basically what I just presented to your listeners, was an intelligence report and an analysis, all right, based on 3 decades of being in the business. Not, on the sidelines, but being in the business. All right? That's what we have here. That it has all the hallmarks. And 10 years ago, 12 years ago, everybody said, "Oh no, we can never have a 9/11." And then when it happened, everybody said, "Oh no, we don't have to worry about our rights. We've got all these safeguards in place." Surprise! Here, look at us today. Now the government says, "Oh, well, gee, we just created another bogeyman, okay, to get involved in. So guess what? We're going right back after them again." And do you see any protests? Okay, do you see any carrying on about going after this really dubious entity, in the Middle East that conveniently shows up? By the way, your listeners should know this. I'm talking about ISIS, of course. Do you know where the wounded go from ISIS? They have wounded. Okay. Do you know where they go? Does anybody know where they go? Well, I found out where they go.
I heard.
And where they're taken. They're medevac to. And they went to the same place that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi went to, or as I like to call him, al-Agassi al-Baghdadi. That's his real name, by the way. Mm-hmm. They go to Israel. They go to Israel to be treated medically. It was Israeli physicians who, quote, diagnosed Mr. al-Baghdadi as being clinically dead, which doesn't mean anything, by the way, in the real world, okay, especially in the medical world. But he was in an Israeli hospital, okay? What does that tell us, everybody listening, about dealing with ISIS, okay? And here we are going to go engage them in another battle, in another big, bloody, drawn-out 10-year disaster, okay, with no delineations made. Does anybody want to call the Iraq War a victory? I didn't call it one when I sent my reports in. Does anybody want to call Afghanistan a victory? Oh, no. No, of course they don't. But the situation is such that, yes, these are provocations, okay? Provocations are made. Provocations were made with ISIS. These people that are putting this information out, like Jade Helm, they want provocation. They want to pressurize the system and find out where the leaks are and then go deal with those leaks, okay? And the leaks usually are in media sources like this show, your show. Mm-hmm. Those are leaks as far as they're concerned. So be careful about whistling past the graveyard for those of us, those who think, oh, no, it couldn't happen. It does happen. It has happened, and it will continue to happen. All right.
So generally speaking, you think I'm wrong in believing that this will kind of come and go as without any sort of real significant event occurring, that this is merely just a test to see what the reactions are? I mean, you think I'm wrong that this will kind of come and go without any real fanfare or any sort of significant action taking place?
As I said, it's not an event, it's a process. Mm-hmm. And the process is the legitimacy of the laws that are being passed to support this action. And that is the NDAA. All right? There's your legitimacy. You've got to have legitimacy to carry this stuff off. Okay? And that's what is happening, is legitimacy in terms of controlling the population, with a uniformed personnel, all right, that has to have a legal basis. And that's just what we are seeing happening right now, is a need is presented, okay, like 9/11. It was a disaster, and a need was presented, and surprisingly enough, everybody said, "Oh yeah, sure, go ahead and take my rights. Go ahead and take our protections. We got to fight those terrorism. Those damn terrorists." All right, okay. Well, 10, 12 years on, guess what? 15 years on, we've still got those executive orders in place. They're getting tighter, folks. They're getting tighter, Chuck. Okay. Yep. And you don't think that these politicians have any hesitation to make them tighter and more control? That's what I see Jade Helm as just a process. It's part of the process. Right. All right.
Okay. Part of the process
when you say
to justify all of these laws and to further implement the agenda as it already stood, just like 9/11 was. They were quite prepared with the Patriot Act before any of those towers fell, before the Pentagon was allegedly struck, and all of that. It's the same deal. They have the agenda in hand, and now they're creating the stuff to fit with it. And Jade Helm is just part of that process.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And it doesn't help to whistle past the graveyard. We've been doing it, for these last, 15 years, and look where it's gotten us. All right? No clear sign of victory anywhere, and we just keep getting bigger bogeymen. Okay? And now there's even conjecture of whether bin Laden ever existed during this whole episode of terrorism. All right? That means that our government completely fabricated the premise that the Nazi Germany created exactly the same situation that started World War II. All right, that's what we have here. It worked then. Why wouldn't it work now? All right, who are we going to believe? What politician, Chuck? Have your listeners call in and tell me the name of a politician that we can believe on these issues.
Well,
just one. Anyway.
Yeah,
Dick Cheney?
I won't bother asking for those phone calls because, one, there are none, and two, we're almost out of time. So, look, Again, I want to thank you for coming on and giving us this glimpse into not only your history, but also giving us the benefit of your analysis. This has been a rather fascinating conversation. I kind of wish that somebody else would have called in to give me that argument that they were trying to give me about Jessica Lynch, but c'est la vie. What can you do? Thing is, I do want to thank everybody who decided to tune into the Ochelli Effect here on UCY.tv, and whether you used an application and a fondle slab, or you decided to go to the website at ucy.tv/TOE, you are appreciated as a listener. Of course, I always forget to mention that there is a donate tab on ucy.tv/TOE. There's one there for myself, there's one there for the network, and any assistance in keeping me on the air would be appreciated, or assistance to the network is also appreciated. But on that page, there is also the MP3 archive, the RSS feed, the links to the YouTube posts from this show, and everything else. Plus, you can find me on Twitter, on Facebook. Twitter is at Ochelli Effect. Facebook, you can find Chuck Ochelli, the Ochelli Effect, or the Ochelli Effect Radio Show discussion group. And by the way, I'm always happy to take feedback, whether good, bad, or indifferent, from the show and any of the presentations that we've done here. And I really do hope that everything in your neck of the woods, no matter who you are listening to the sound of my voice, is going well. And I hope that the world around us does not collapse. But Frank Gregory Ford, once again, always a privilege and an honor to have you on with me, sir. And I do appreciate you taking this time tonight. A couple of seconds left. If you want to throw out one last thing, go right ahead.
Well, I think we covered